Hello and welcome to Pagabo Live, our initiative designed to promote knowledge in the public sector. My name's Tom, and over the next hour, we'll be talking about local government reorganisation with our panel of industry experts who will ask to introduce themselves now, starting with Meg.
Hi, my name is Meg Carter. I'm a regional director working for AtkinsRéalis. I'm local government through and through. I've worked in local government the entirety of my career, came to the private sector, and have now got the lovely job of educating people around local government reorganisation and devolution.
Brilliant stuff. And Gavin?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gavin Mason. I'm an operations director with Pick Everard. Again, Pick Everard serves a big local authority client network, and my role is rolling out design teams and the like for those clients.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to both of you for joining us today. We had hoped to get some local government representatives onto the panel today as well, but as you can imagine, in the wake of the local elections, they are all quite busy at the moment. But today's event will be a panel discussion. We're going to talk about how the changes will affect governance, leadership, and accountability, as well as what the workforce change looks like, where everything fits alongside devolution, and also what it all means for procurement. We'd also love it if you guys, as the audience, could get involved as well. Feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, depending on what platform you're using. Sometimes it's hidden behind the More button, but please submit any questions that you have throughout in the Q&A box, and we'll do our very best to get to them at the end of today's webinar. We'll also be running our usual polls throughout today's session to gauge everyone's level of understanding and interest in the topics that we are discussing today. And as if by magic, here is our first poll asking our audience: how likely are you to be impacted by the effects of local government reorganisation? Are you likely to be highly impacted, moderately impacted, slightly impacted, or not impacted at all? If you could fire up that poll now, please. So how likely are to be affected by the effects of local government reorganisation? Highly impacted, moderately impacted, slightly impacted, or not impacted at all? Sorry, a few gremlins in the system today. Maybe a slightly tired system on a Tuesday afternoon. Just give it another 10 seconds or so as the votes are still coming in on that. If you could close that poll now, please. Brilliant. So looking at that, again, as anyone who watches Pagabo Live regularly will know, maths isn't my strong point, but we're looking at around 71% of our audience that are either moderately or highly affected or impacted by the effects of local government reorganisation. So hopefully today's webinar will be of great interest to you. So we'll go to our first question now. I'll start with you on this one, Meg, but I'll also come to you afterward, Gavin. So when people are talking about local government reorganisation, it can sound quite abstract, even though this isn't the first time this has happened. From where you sit, what does it mean in practice right now for not just the councils, but also the places that they serve, Meg?
Yeah, and I think it's really key to kind of start with what it actually is, because you're absolutely right, Tom. I think there's a real abstract sense around local government reorganisation. It's on every panel, every event. You can't go anywhere without people sort of talking about this alongside the devolution agenda as well. And it's really key to recognise that local government reorganisation is about significant changes to the structure of local government and how services are delivered, community touch points with local government, and it does look to significantly change the structures. The arguments around that, efficiency of, efficacy of service delivery, being able to make sure that residents don't have numerous touch points with an authority, that it's really clear who their sort of service provider is. So I think there's real merit in sort of how that works. And as you say, Tom, I think it's useful for everyone to know that this has happened before. You will likely be working with a lot of authorities that have already been through this, the likes of, Wiltshire, for example, Dorset, that they have been through local government reorganisation, and there's a lot of places going through it. Some are going on a slightly longer timeline, a shorter timeline, and an immediate timeline, so that there is a real mix across the country as well. I think Depending on where you are in that journey, the sort of second part of that question there, what does it mean in practice? I think my view at the moment is that actually at the moment it's quite a lot of uncertainty for roles, for how things are delivered. There's some, I think when the places that have already done this went, there was very little lessons learned and things like that. I think it's enormously beneficial that people have gone through that process, and now we can draw on the wealth of experience of the places that have done this before and hopefully do it really well this time round. But I think it does cause a lot of uncertainty. I think it's local government is remarkable at just delivering stuff. They do just get things done. But I think how things function when you've got potentially the current structures, the new structures, the elections that go with that, the transition of staff that go with that, it's a really comprehensive change program that's sort of needed to support staff and residents through those changes. There will also be a lot of residents that don't feel any touch points. They won't necessarily even notice or care potentially that their boundaries are changing, and you'll get some that have numerous touch points with an authority, and therefore they will notice that difference. I think for businesses there's huge changes obviously around planning, which I know we'll come into a lot more detail around this, but there are changes for businesses around how you're engaging with your local authority. But the reality of it is, for people on the ground in local government, social workers, and they're not going to care. They're unfortunately dealing with the most vulnerable people in our communities. They are still going to carry on doing that. So for them, they won't feel it necessarily as much as other people in the organisation.
Yeah, the U word, uncertainty. We'll definitely come back to that to later in the webinar. Gavin, does that tally with your experience of it thus far?
Yeah, definitely, and it's a complex process, and it's been carried out in a political environment, and it's been carried out within a difficult political environment in the UK. Ultimately, the government isn't imposing solutions on the authorities; they're asking them to come up with a solution. They're looking to get a unitised, and as Meg talks about, a solution that allows a greater level of authority and the ability to put strategic decision making, dovetailing with the devolution side of matters. So it's quite a complicated process, and ultimately at the end of the day it's about getting things to work and saving money, and there's a rationale for streamlining some of these authorities, and it's making sure that happens without creating any hiatus within the delivery models, which we all rely on to collect our bins and provide the services that we rely on as local citizens within our communities.
Yeah, and we've alluded to it already. As Mega said, this isn't the first time local government reorganisation has happened. So what particularly makes this phase of reorganisation feel significant? Is it that structural change, or is it that kind of almost changing systems thinking of how councils have been asked to rethink leadership, accountability, delivery all in one package? We'll go to you on this one first, Gavin, but again, good to hear from you on this one as well, Meg.
Yeah, I mean it's a complicated environment, and it's doing it all at once is a difficult piece of work for anyone to take on. The uncertainty that's sort of there in the market, in the environment at the moment, is also a very key problem for all involved. The people we're speaking to on the ground don't necessarily know what the situation is. Certainly there seems to be a process of dealing with the issues in and behind the scenes, rather than that sort of, and there's obviously going to be reasons for that, managing expectations and making sure that people are taken on the journey is important, and it's making sure that information doesn't get out in the wrong way. So the process is I suspect probably necessarily complicated by that condition, that environment that they've got to work in. But that is creating a lot of uncertainty around how it's all going to be structured, where people are going to end up, what kind of relationships are going to be left in place at the end of it. And we'll come to relationships as we go through this piece, because ultimately the delivery of products, of services, is a relationship-led issue. We're in the supply chain dealing with the local authorities, and that is something that ultimately drives a lot of the delivery. So it's a complicated process, and trying to do it all at once doesn't make it any easier for anybody involved.
Yeah, but Mag, is it that everything all at once that's making it feel so significant this time around?
Yeah, I think for me, there's kind of three key things. One is the scale. So we've got obviously some areas that have just done it. We've got the likes of Surrey who are going through it currently. We've then got 4 out of the 6 priority areas that are doing it. And then we've got everybody else that was asked to submit proposals to look at that. So it's quite a lot all to do at once. So I think that's why I did it everywhere, because it's likely an authority you either have a touch point with, or you're living within an authority. Your council is probably going through some sort of change. It's just such an enormous scale of authorities going through it. I think for me as well, it's done under a time where local government isn't exactly financially buoyant, shall we say. It's probably one of the most challenging fiscal times in local authorities. So to do this scale of change, which you'd love to be able to invest in, look at vision, leadership, you'd really want to do this really well. I think there's enormous pressure on local government as a whole. So I think to do this level of change on top of that is very difficult. And then the third bit for me is around collaborative politics. I think LGR needs politicians to come together, to work collaboratively, to work cross-party. And it's whether at the moment there is potentially the circumstances for them to do that. I think we've got, the election results are fascinating in themselves, but collaborative working amongst politicians is going to be really key, I think, for LGR. They're going to have to rise above some of the politics and work together to get a really good outcome for residents and for the staff within those new unitaries and those old structures.
And from the conversations you guys have been having, which of those, obviously there's multiple priorities there, sometimes competing priorities with each other, which of those kind of feel most immediate at the moment for those councils? Is it the governance side? Is it that financial sustainability that we've already touched on? Is it service redesign? Is it managing that uncertainty that we've already mentioned as well, Mag?
I think, unfortunately, I think it's all of those things all at
Yeah.
once. It's sort of that everywhere, everything all at once. And I think a lot of work, we know a lot of work is happening within the local authorities to think about this, and it does depend where the authorities are on their journey. But I would say that the most overwhelming thing you hear is managing that uncertainty, making sure they are looking for the opportunities, keeping it positive. There's a lot of staff involved in potentially these structural changes. So how do you make sure that you're keeping your workforce? Recruitment retention is going to be really important. And then you've got the people at the end of this, like I said earlier, the most vulnerable in our communities need authorities to deliver. And I think how they do that is obviously their utmost priority. So for me, I think, they are doing all of this all at once while trying to manage the day job. And then the managing of uncertainty, because I think there is a lot of things that could still change. There's a lot of unknowns for those of them that haven't gone through that process. And I just don't think local government has necessarily the headspace to sit and work all this stuff out, bless them. I think that, it's full on all the time. So this is on top of their day jobs. So managing that, I think, is really difficult. The pace of the change and the scale of the change is enormous.
Yeah. And Gavin, I guess all of these things boil down to the fact that there are people kind of having to deliver them at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big stated aims for this is to save money, and circa 750 million pounds a year they're looking to save on the administration of local authority. And from that perspective, that in its own right breeds a certain amount of uncertainty. You're trying to reduce the budget. You're trying to claw money out of budget, and then how is that going to get replaced? And as part of the solution, the guys and girls on the ground will be being asked to push and find the efficiencies that are going to generate those savings. And in an environment where your general fund's already under a lot of attack from the pressing needs of society, trying to get further money together to deliver those efficiencies, you're going to have to work hard at trying to deliver more for less, which is the old adage of government, I guess. Can we deliver more for less? And that is always going to be a pressurized environment.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've both kind of gone to it's all of the above. We'll actually put that to our audience now. 71% said they're going to be either moderately or highly affected by LGR. So, can fire up the next poll, please, which is asking the question of which part of the LGR agenda is most immediately affecting you. Is it the governance side? Is it financial sustainability, workforce pressures, service redesign, or managing uncertainty? If you could have that poll running now, please. Thank you very much. And while that poll's running, we'll just do a little bit of promotion for UK Reef next week. If anybody in the audience is attending, Pagabo is working with UK Reef to deliver 3 full days of activity, 16 content sessions, all dedicated to local authorities and to growth. They've got 6 dedicated local authority development sessions, 24 public sector speakers and key voices from government, combined authorities and local councils. So well worth a look if you can make sure that you are attending UK Reef next week. If you can make sure you pop in and see the guys at Pagabo, that would be great. Okay, so looking at the results of our poll, a reasonably even split, but more than a third of you have said that managing uncertainty is the biggest thing that's affecting you. So 14% each saying governance and financial sustainability, 16% saying workforce pressures, and 20% saying service design. But that uncertainty, 35% of attendees saying that is the biggest thing they've got to deal with, and that isn't really a surprise given what we've just been speaking about. So we'll move on to the next segment of the webinar, which is around delivery and implementation. So we'll go to you on this one first, Gavin. So where do these big sort of LGR reorganization programs tend to be most difficult in practice?
Well, you've got the legal process of getting over the day one process of combining the authority, but then of course you have your day two issues, and your day two issues start with whether your systems talk to each other, whether your contracts are aligned, who is responsible for what elements of delivery within which areas. So the problems need to be ironed out on the way in as much as possible, but ultimately that kind of I suppose discovery, if you like, of what the gaps are within the delivery process become apparent quite quickly. Also within that, obviously, you're changing the structures and you're changing roles for people. And you're breaking down some of the relationship capital that you have within your organizations. So relationships that tended to get things done because they were in place and embedded within each of the previous authorities get dissipated, and for a lot of organizations, that sort of recycled knowledge and repetitive delivery of various services and projects is key to maintaining that kind of continuity of service. So your day two challenges are really quite significant in terms of making sure that you can carry on doing or producing the same output you previously produced.
Yeah, and Meg, you have, as you mentioned, have had experience on both sides of the coin, both from the local authority and the kind of consultant side on things. Where do these programs tend to hit those stumbling blocks?
Well, I mean, I echo absolutely what Gavin's saying. Like, there's some real practicalities of kind of systems talking to each other, legacy, sort of how you carry that stuff over. For me, there's an enormous cultural element, which I think starts to, as things start to flow through the systems and you start to sort of, you've got your structures in place and you start to see that cultural element of where people, feel they sit and how they operate within the organization. I think that's a really enormous piece internally. I think there's a challenge sometimes as well in that transition around. I think it's going to be a challenge, particularly at the moment, the two elections, the one for the current structures and then the one for potentially the new structures, and different areas have different timetables. But I think I feel for members that are potentially having to sit across two authorities, two boundaries, as one's being that could be quite a complicated thing. It's just I really echo what Gavin says to us. It's the practicalities of everything. Once you press that big red button and you're on as the new authority, how do you do that? The practicalities of that is really difficult. But yeah, there's peaks and troughs, and I would it'll be something I'll say throughout this is really go and learn about your local authority, where you sit, what transition your local authority is on, because then you'll be able to map your kind of pinch points as businesses and see how that's going to affect you.
Yeah, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, but obviously one of the key arguments for local government reorganization is that clearer accountability, the better outcomes, the value for
Yeah.
money that it brings. But what are the risks, Meg, if this is actually
Yeah.
process handled badly?
Yeah, I think for me one of the biggest ones is that cultural piece. That's sort of where my head immediately goes to. LGR requires vision, leadership, strategic approach, kind of a commitment to change. And I think we need. I would welcome sort of additional funding to help local government go through this change, invest in their people, invest in steadying this enormous ship that it is going to be, heading in a direction. I think I would really welcome significant investment in that, and making sure local authority officers and members are given the support they need through this change. And I think where there's been challenges, has been around not being able to really implement the cultural elements of, people will say that they are part of their old authority, and not necessarily say that they're part of the new authority. And I think that's really important, but that requires time and money and thought process and visioning. And I think leadership, I think that's something where if it's not done well, can really trip you up. And I also think, going back to Gavin's point around systems and structures and governance, for me, governance structures very early on that are repetitive, that are clear, that are concise, and that you can run things through so people start to really know how things are working, I think is really, really key as well.
And Gavin, where do you see those kind of the risks if this doesn't quite go to plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is you might get drawn into a process of compromise. The process is a political process, and it's a process of trying to get alignment between various authorities, various groups. If you compromise too much on the way in which the system is set up, and you defer decisions too late within the day because they are difficult to make about who controls what aspect, what service delivery, you then end up in a position where you might see that services can't be delivered, or there are gaps between the various processes, and that's probably the biggest risk, that there is fundamentally something falls over, and in a specific region you aren't able to deliver for a period of days or weeks or whatever it might be, a particular service, because actually some of those decisions haven't been made about how it's actually delivered in practice. I'm also thinking about the borders around various authorities. Obviously, there are relationships there between the neighbouring authorities, how that all works out. So there's a number of issues that as a person who doesn't have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, I'm thankful that there are people out there who are prepared to take this on.
Yeah, and we've already kind of touched on devolution a little bit, but how should councils be thinking in terms of marrying up the principles of devolution and the prospects of that alongside LGR? Are they generally complementary, or is there a risk that one's going to distract from the other? Meg, we'll go to you on this one first, please.
I have a real, so I think it's really, really important to establish that they are two completely separate processes. So, local government reorganisation is about fundamentally changing the structures of local government. Devolution is about the transferring of powers from Westminster to a region, and that is done through a mayor and a strategic authority. So they are very, very different processes. And how we've picked up on that in local government reorganisation is the whole country is on a different journey as well in terms of devolution and where they're going. I think the authorities that I speak to, sort of devolution is something that is just happening. It's mayor goes in, strategic authority goes in, fine. Local government reorganisation is far more of an impact on the day to day for them is what I'm hearing. And I think doing the both together is obviously enormously challenging, I think, just because of brain power and capacity to do that. You know, you look at some of the residents, for example, in Hampshire and the Solent, they've got elections that they've just done for the current authorities. They've then got elections for their new authorities, and then they've got mayoral elections. And realistically, you know, how many residents will know what those 3 years worth of elections are actually for? It is a real challenge. And I think, you know, people will become a little bit election weary. And we run that risk of people not knowing sort of the impact of what they're voting for. So I think there's a risk that it distracts because residents and voters don't know what they're voting for, and I think the processes can be very complementary. You know, it makes sense, right? Go from lots of little authorities to big authorities, and then put an entity over the top who can oversee and unlock growth. And in principle, the structures all work, and it makes a lot of sense. And we've seen a lot of great things happen from the mayors. You know, they have unlocked a significant amount of things. I think there's a lot of places that the mayor doesn't fix everything. You know, there's that we've got to not lose, you know, not just focus on once the mayor's here, everything will be fine. It's not necessarily the case. And there's a real structural change to go through. But I think councils are thinking about this very, very differently. They are two separate processes. And I think it's really important that you know, people that are not involved in it on this webinar, is really clear to make that distinction. Although they're talked about all the time as the same thing, almost, they are not. They're two very, very different, can be complementary, but there are risks, because unless you know about this stuff, and let's be honest, why would you necessarily know about this stuff? I think it just is all just feeling very uncertain and very unclear, and no one really knows how the structures are working or changing or what is. So I think there needs to be a real education piece, and it's just making sure people get that time to go and find out what's happening in their area.
Yeah, I mean, Gavin, Meg's delineated very clearly there. There is obviously the big difference between the two principles, the devolution and LGR. But is the challenge there that actually to the public they are seen as the same thing, and that then distracts from the actual deliverability angle of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, Meg's obviously completely correct in that, but the issue is that the devolution side of it is the strategic decision making that the government's really looking to, as she correctly identifies, has pushed growth and has pushed benefits across the various authorities that have enacted a sort of mayoral regime. But it's that strategic decision making that's going to hold the key to making decisions within the local areas. And I wonder when they come to reorganise. I mean, obviously Surrey's gone through it, and we've got a couple that are in the process of agreeing on the next stages. But when it comes through to the wider body of local authority, where the people will start thinking, and it's the complication of how you reorganize when you know that strategic decision making above you might be the more important role within making those changes within your local area. So I do worry that there'll be a certain amount of competition between people and authorities as to how they are prepared to release various functions, and because it is a political environment, and because it is there is no mandated solution to all of this, you will end up with a hodgepodge of solutions to the issue, and that will be complicated by the desire to devolve powers from Parliament as well.
Mm. And just to move on to the kind of the workforce change side of things as well, because obviously we've had from our responses today on the polls, 71% of people saying that their authority is moderately to highly affected. That usually means that a large proportion of those people will be looking at their roles and how they will be affected. So how it's what most often where LGR really becomes real to people. So what are councils going to need to do most over the next 12 to 24 months to kind of navigate that, Gavin?
Well, I think when you're confronted with this amount of change and this many issues above you, you need to be able to trust beneath you. So I was, in our role when we've got project managers, architects, what we're looking at is trying to put people looking down at the problem and then an interface. So not worrying too much about what's going on, leaving that to a trusted party above you, your client to look up and manage the interface. So I would be looking to workforces to understand exactly where their focus would be with such a large number of issues above people to also cope with and manage and stakeholders to engage with. It's important. Not only do you have a skilled workforce and a workforce that understands the issues and how to resolve the issues, but also one that can focus on the upstream issues and leave the day-to-day delivery to the people who can do that for you. Because I don't think the sort of model of getting too looking too far up and too far down is going to help in this scenario. We're going to need people who are experienced at making sure that they're concentrating on the right level of detail in their orbit, rather than, as I say, taking on too much, I guess, is probably the issue.
Meg, I can see you nodding away there. I guess that
Yeah,
ties with
sorry,
what you're
I'm a
thinking.
real pen and paper scribbler. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm the same, pencil and paper
Yeah.
here.
Just can't help myself. So yeah, I think for me, what they're going to need over the next 12 to 24 months is stay calm. And there is for me a real stay calm. Is that sort of, keep calm and carry on, because I think the delivery on the ground, those statutory services, I think things will still happen. I was in local government through COVID. They have a remarkable ability to just do really well. So I think there's a real sort of calm needed. I think 12 to 24 months obviously just to manage sort of everyone's expectations. I think this process takes a very, very long time. Some of the authorities that have already gone through it, I think, are still feeling it, and I think some of the business cases that were put forward for this round, people were saying 10 years really to find their feet, establish their new authorities and get that, which I think is really interesting. And some aren't saying that, but that's not an unusual figure that we've seen quoted. And I think there's something about sort of communication. So I think explaining what you're doing, what is going on, to staff, to politicians and members, keeping that line of communication open, but also to the sectors that are trying to support. A lot of private sector organisations sort of talk to me about it and what can they do and how can they, what do they do while all of this is going on. And I think I would welcome the authorities keeping lines of communication open with the private sector to just keep everyone informed about what's going on and what's happening, because it's going to feel sticky. It's going to feel really like unsure of who you're talking to and why and where. And I think if the authorities can do anything to communicate that to their officers, to the people in those organisations, some authorities aren't really saying a lot to their teams, and I think that really needs to change. Some are, which is great, but I think people are best armed if they have a level of information around what's going on, because I think there's an assumption everyone understands what's going on, and but I think it's really important that they keep everyone informed as much as they can of what is happening. Being realistic, this is, like we've said, uncertain, huge amount of work and all that good stuff. So it's probably an enormous ask of what councils, but if we flip that as well, I think the private sector should still keep talking to local government. I think they should still want to go and find out, go and upskill yourselves on this topic, because they will need you to be the constant over the next 12 to 24 months. And the private sector will likely be the only constant, or, other sectors outside of local government, apologies. Obviously, there's lots of charity sectors, things like that. They are the ones that will keep your regions ticking over and delivering while you're going through this significant amount of change.
I say a week is a long time in politics. Obviously, 10 years if as a time scale for some of this change is a heck of a long time for people to be thinking about. We'll go into one of our final polls for today, just to summarize that last section, and we'll put that to our audience. So, to our audience, where will councils need to focus most to make LGR work in practice? Is it in that delivery and implementation stage? Is it governance and accountability? Is it workforce and organizational capacity, or is it that leadership through change, that sort of change management piece that we've talked about quite a bit already today? Interested to hear your thoughts. We'll leave that running for a few more moments while we get some more votes in. And I do see that a few people have joined us a little later, so I will once again run a plug for Pagabo's local growth pavilion at UK Reef next week. They'll have 3 days of activity within that pavilion, 6 dedicated local authority development sessions and 16 content sessions overall, more than 20 speakers from the public sector and key voices from government, combined authorities and also local councils. So there will also be a few MPs on those panels who may be slightly distracted by goings on in Westminster at the moment. Okay, we'll call that poll to a close now, and a fairly even split between leadership through change and delivery and implementation, both getting over a third of the responses there. So that does tally up with what we've been discussing today. Obviously, the implementation side of it very important, but also that leadership, and as we've said, managing through that change and making sure that the workforce is kept as informed and as educated on it as possible. We'll just move on to a little bit around procurement now, and the role that procurement can play in all of this, because is that role for procurement mainly about maintaining continuity and controlling risk, or can it actually be one of the things that's a real genuine enabler of reorganisation and better long-term outcomes? Gavin, we'll go to you on this one first.
Yeah, I mean, procurement is a really hot topic in public sector. It's the ability to react, the ability to deliver and effectively, efficiently deliver resource in the right areas. It's about trying to find the best athlete to do a particular piece of work, and procurement and the ability to find those people and those resources to do work is ultimately very important for anyone who's under pressure, but certainly if you're dealing with a lot of reorganisation issues, and you do have a load of scope gap issues coming to light, then the ability to get speed to market, I think, is probably the critical one. Obviously, focusing on value, and it's a bit unfortunate that, again, the Procurement Act has come into play recently. There isn't a lot of case law around the impact of decisions that councils and local authorities will be making around the Procurement Act. So that's made a more challenging environment for people to procure services. So, structures that allow you to get access to market is critical at this juncture, I would say.
Yeah, and Meg, your views in this, please. Can we actually see procurement as that genuine enabler in the reorganisation side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be, and I think what we need is sort of the once authorities have gone through this process, clarity on that, and how they think we can use procurement in a smarter way to be able to look at those longer term outcomes. But I mean, to be honest, I don't have much more to add than what Gavin. I agree entirely. It's absolutely, it should be, and I think there is definitely an element of that continuity piece is really key for me. I talk about that a lot, and how you can control risk and ensure delivery in a way but we've also got to be realistic about the amount of delivery that will happen.
Yeah, and as we've got an audience question around sort of delivery and capital capital programs and etc., which we'll get to in a few moments. But we'll bring up our final audience poll of today's session. And that is around the role procurement can play in local government reorganisation. So what role do you believe it should play? Is it around that maintaining continuity during change? Is it managing risk and compliance, enabling strategic transformation, or supporting better service outcomes? I've just mentioned the Q&A there. We still have the opportunity for you to submit any questions that you'd like to put to Gavin or to Meg into the Q&A box. Feel free to remain anonymous as well. We realise this is a potentially sticky subject for some of you and not wanting to put your name to anything. So feel free to submit anonymously if you have any questions that the guys may be able to help you with. We'll just have another 5 seconds or so on that poll before we close it up, please. And again, a relatively even split, but more than a third saying that supporting of better outcomes, which is something that Meg has just mentioned, being key, and also around a quarter saying maintaining continuity and enabling that strategic transformation. So a decent split there, and probably sort of roughly equitable to what we were saying throughout today's panel. We'll wrap up with a final couple of questions before we go to our audience as well on this. So Meg, I'll go to you on this first. So based on the organisations that you're speaking to and working with at the moment, what does good look like when it comes to LGR? What separates those that are approaching it strategically rather than those that are just reacting to it or maybe not quite there yet with it?
Yeah, I think the key bits are kind of the officers and the staff involved when you're talking to local government. You know, they're very, very aware of that. They have whole organisations that are going through this. It's obviously a very publicly talked about thing. There's not many organisations that go through a change programme, and it's publicized everywhere, on every panel, at every event. So I think, you know, they're very conscious, a lot of them, that they've got staff that are going through this process. So I think for them, what good would look like is a smooth transition for staff involved. I think likewise, therefore, residents too. I think a lot of local authorities that I'm talking to don't really want residents to feel this. If anything, they just want them to feel the positive later on. I think, you know, and like I picked up on before, a lot of vulnerable residents who shouldn't have to feel this. They're going through enough. This should be just something that happens, and their service provision continues, and no one falls through the cracks of change, and making sure that that's really clear. So those are the two bits. I think as well, there is a real, I think you hear so much negativity around kind of politics at the moment and what's going on, and I think everyone's feeling super disillusioned with it. But there are a lot of people that want this to be a really collaborative effort. They want to bring this together well. They know, like I said earlier, there's a lot of lessons learned from places that have gone through this and how they've brought everyone on that journey, and no one's ever going to be happy fully. But I think there is a real sense of collaborative working where possible, and I know sometimes it doesn't look and feel like that externally, but I would just like to reassure people, I think there is a lot internally that they're having to work, the ones that are going through it now, in a really, really different way than they've ever had to before, cross party, you know, all in a room together talking about this stuff. I think hopefully there'll be a little glimmer of sort of hope for politics and collaborative working across parties. That's what I think they would say internally as well. That would be my sort of summary: officers, residents, and collaboration.
Yeah, and Gavin, from your experience along this road, what does good look like for this LGR?
Yeah. Well, I think building on Meg's point, really, and collaboration. I mean, the form of collaboration that I would like to see, you know, really at the forefront of delivery here is communication. I mean, if the communication process, because there is always going to be bumps in the road, and if we can get the communication out there to say, right, this is what we're doing in this region, this is the way we're going to deliver, or we're not even certain about how we're going to do this, but we need you to be plugged in to support us when we decide which way we want to go. I think that will be the a really good outcome generally, actually, for the public sector, but it will also, help to smooth delivery and minimise the effect of any bumps that we incur on the way through this. Without that process, perhaps the stop-start nature and the disconnection with delivery will become obvious to residents and stakeholders alike. So I'd say that, Tom, if everyone keeps an eye on how they're communicating what's happening within their area.
And that kind of leads in nicely into our final question. And maybe this 1 year's timeline is maybe not long enough for this conversation. But if we were to come back to this conversation in a year's time, if we were to do a 1 year on anniversary webinar of this, what would make you feel that the LGR agenda is genuinely starting to make a difference? Meg, I'll go to you on this one first.
Oh, that's such a hard question. And I
In a
think,
year as well. Yeah,
yeah, I was
sorry.
going to say, I just want to manage your expectations within a year. And again, like it depends on the authority and where they are in their timeline. I think for me, what I suppose slightly reframing that question mainly because I'm not too sure I can answer the question. I think for me, what I would like to see in a year's time when we talk about local government reorganisation and the impact that it's starting to make is I would like to be able to, for businesses, for residents to be able to articulate the changes that are happening and what's going on and kind of know where their authority is in that process. Not because they're feeling it from a negative, but because they just know what's going on and picking up both Gavin and I have mentioned communication at various points throughout this. I think I think as well within the year, and I know I'm sure it will be within the year, just the finalisation of those boundaries, so we know everyone's new boundaries and what that looks like. And I think I would love to see the LGR agenda encouraging politicians to work cross-party and be more collaborative. I know I touched on that in my last point, but I think this is where they're working together to create, to look at a significant change for their organisations. I think I would love to be able to see them working better collaboratively, cross-party would be great. But yeah, in a year's time, feeling that LGR agenda is going to be quite difficult in terms of service delivery, outcomes for residents, which is what this is about. That will be really important.
So, Gavin, I guess the answer to this is it just that communication side of things? Is it just that it starts to make a difference because it's being communicated clearly?
Well, I think one of the things here is you're combining some different areas between within various authorities. So we're living, particularly in local authorities. I think the local elections recently just showed we're in a more fractured political environment. There were more councils with no overall control this time around than there have been before, and it was affecting the areas under consideration here. I think success, and it probably isn't a year's time frame, is that, and it goes to Meg's point, is that there is more political stability comes out of this within the various regions. I think one of the risks that this goes wrong is you start getting a democratic gap between various areas, between what the people actually want and what the authority is geared up to do. And I think one of the key risks there is that you then start seeing a certain amount of protest or more protest and more resistance to what the councils are trying to achieve. So I think a clear message of success will be actually more political unity within the regions that are created.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to you both. We've had plenty of interaction coming from our audience today, so clearly a very engaging session there. The poll's just going to pop up on screen for you now, just asking whether you'd be interested in a free procurement continuity check to help you identify the risks, pressures, and quick wins during periods of organisational change. Feel free to answer that as we go along, but we'll step now into our audience Q&A session. So feel free to submit any questions that you have for Gavin and Meg into our Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You should be able to find that using the menu you have at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So feel free to add anything you'd like to put to our panel. But one to start with, and it's a point that's been made by by Vincent Hunt in the Q&A, but it's one that jumped out to me as well around that collaboration piece you were talking about, Meg, because we talk about cross-party collaboration in these things, but how do we square the circle with potential local authorities that are being, say, combined under LGR that have competing visions or have those challenges of one potentially being for a city central authority and one for a more rural authority? How can we square the circle there and make sure we're getting that collaboration across?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and it comes up a lot actually. Like, how do you still maintain a local presence? How do you understand what's happening in your place? If you're an enormous authority that's kind of sitting above, how do you make sure that you still feel that you're part of something? One, it raises a very interesting question between community and local government and the relationship between the two and how that all works, which is a really fascinating piece around place and what their local authority means to people. Is it a touch point? Is it a service provider? Is it an integral part of their community? That debate comes up a lot around how this then works. I think as well, it's not people mustn't forget about towns, parishes. BCP Council are part of. They did LGR years ago, and they've just re-established that layer to actually make sure they continue to have a touch point with local communities. So I think the power of towns and parishes and community councils, which underpin all the structures of local government, is not to be underestimated. And I'll be very interested to see if over time we see their role significantly change. We have seen it in pockets across the country. We've seen it scale back in some places, scaled up in others. I think they're really one to watch as this process goes through to remain as touch points for the bigger unitary authorities. But it's a really valid question, and it's a challenge that comes up all the time. If you're creating a bigger authority, how do you make sure that you maintain a sense of local and you understand what's going on with your community? And I absolutely think that's a really fair challenge. But like I say, I think that layer of government will be very interesting to see how that operates, towns and parishes and community councils. I mean, there's thousands of them across the country, and how they can best interact with their unitaries. And then I think it does raise a whole other question around, like I say, local government's relationship with their community and what people see local government's role within community and place.
Yeah, that's a very good summary of some of the challenges there. Thank you, Meg. Gavin, we'll go to you on this one. It's a question around kind of local authorities' capital programs and how they kind of will cross over. Because is there a risk of stagnation potentially with some of these larger capital programs, particularly in areas where there is a transition and successor council that need to get the written consent of the successor council before proceeding? Is there a risk of those major projects that are much needed in a lot of areas coming to a bit of a standstill because of LGR?
Well, I think at the moment generally there's a risk of stagnation. I think some of the viability metrics around many of the projects that we're looking at the moment are difficult, and we're sort of in an environment where that is unfortunately almost commonplace. So certainly it doesn't help. I mean, if there's any decision process, as we found out through many of the regulatory changes that we've seen within the industry at the moment, within the construction side of it at least, the more decision making that goes into the process, it does inevitably slow matters down. I think the one thing that I'm always conscious of, it's how government can sort of liberate some of its capital to support councils deliver. And I think if they are reorganising and we're making the savings, I think as Meg suggested earlier, it's about giving more to be able to get a lot more back. And I think from that perspective, if the changes are pushed through and go through as scheduled, I think it is important that the government invests money to make sure that those projects aren't stalled for those very reasons.
And Meg, we have quite a large local authority audience in attendance today, judging by some of the responses to the polls. But what do you think people outside of local government most misunderstand around the reorganisation of this scale, because I think it'd be quite important for our audience to kind of put that civilian hat on and see what it is that their communities might be misunderstanding about LGR.
So one, I think there is a fundamental lack of understanding about what LGR is and what it means. And there's a really good comment in the chat around in the question, sorry, about sort of we have to say about what is changing and what's not changing. And I think a really sort of realistic view of kind of the impact and what that means, and picking up on there's a point in there, sorry, apologies, I can't remember who put it, around the vision as well, and the authorities have different set visions and they want to make sure that they've got a clear vision overall. I think residents need to see that. They need to not see it, as sort of loads of different visions and loads of different service provisions. They want to know sort of what the actual change means for them. And I think businesses are the same. I spend more of my time talking to the private sector about what's going on in local government, because there's just, why would you need to know about this stuff, right? This isn't, but it's such an enormous change and it's being talked about everywhere, and there's almost a carelessness to how it's being talked about, and what is, I think, really just making sure that there's facts out there, there's information accessible, and reality of what it means. Don't assume a level of knowledge. I'm not too sure that's necessarily there, and I've worked on both sides, and what I assumed people knew, they don't. So I think it's really important that we share information with residents, with businesses, with people that are outside of local government. I think it's really important, because I think we need to demonstrate empathy. This is an enormous change for these organisations to go through, and everyone's so quick to criticise local government and so quick to, they just get so much criticism, and it's really difficult as an organisation to work in. And I think we need to, if you understand what an organisation is going through, I hope that makes it easier to build those relationships.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And we'll probably get to one final question before we wrap up today. I appreciate we're rapidly reaching the end of our time. But I'll put this to both of you. We'll go to Gavin first, but then we'll finish off with Meg as well. And imagine we're talking to a council leader or somebody who's at the very start of this LGR process. What's the one thing you would kind of advise them and tell them not to underestimate about the impact of the process?
Gosh, Tom, I don't,
just summarize it all in one point, if you could, Gavin, just so we can get off. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, I feel somewhat underqualified to talk to a chief exec of a council about it. But in terms of what I'd like to see, or not underestimated, is just as I said, going back to the communication point, really. If the teams involved can communicate with the supply chain to make matters more fluid, keep the supply chain abreast of what's going on, or what you're expecting to go on, that makes delivery an awful lot easier for all involved, and it allows you to meet the challenges that you're going to face. And I think that's probably the one thing that I would advise anyone to do in this process, is just make sure that people are kept informed, and that should make a lot of things a lot easier.
Yeah, and Meg, same question to you. What's the one thing you'd tell them not to underestimate?
And just for the record, I totally echo what Gavin's saying around comms, but just so there's another one in the pot as well. I think do not underestimate how much change management will be required. I think it's enormously, and everything that comes with that: structures, culture, vision, leadership, the governance processes. Don't underestimate the level of change that is required, and how you're going to bring everyone on that journey. And picking up on Gavin's point, talk to the supply chain, to the market, to your residents, to the charity sector. Don't underestimate the level of change and bringing people on that journey that's needed.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much to Gavin and Meg for their contributions today. It's been a fascinating webinar, and it's been echoed by a number of things we've had flying in the question and answer box, not just questions, but also some really strong and interesting opinions in there, which we've alluded to throughout today's session. But that is unfortunately all we have time for today. Thank you very much to you all for tuning in. If you signed up to today's session, you are now part of the Pagabo Live community, so you'll receive a link and a calendar invite for all of our upcoming sessions, so be sure not to miss those. There'll also be a newsletter coming out around a week after each of the Pagabo Live sessions, with a recording of the webinar in video and podcast form, as well as further insights from the Pagabo team. You'll also be able to claim a CPD credit for today's session, should receive an email from the Pagabo team in the coming days of how you can do that. And just a final reminder that if you are at UK Reef next week, you can find us in the local growth pavilion with a full schedule of content on a wide range of areas relevant to local authorities. And as you can see on screen, our next Pagabo Live episode will be in June, where we're looking at how you can create positive community impact through procurement. So all that remains to be said is thank you very much again for your attendance today, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you very much.